welcome you inside the Moss Arts Center in Blacksburg, Virginia for another edition of the 3304 Sports Kickoff and Tip-Off Crossover Show. I'm your host, Braden Schenck, joined alongside my renowned panelists, Giovanni Heater and Raza Umerani. Gentlemen, we have an action-packed show on the docket today. We're talking Virginia Tech football, Hokies men's hoops, Hokies women's hoops, and so much more. So it's going to be an action-packed Friday here in Blacksburg. Let's get it started out on the gridiron. Virginia Tech, a dominating win over in-state foe Virginia by the final of 55-19 or 55-17. Giovanni, I'm going to start with you. That was a game that the Hokies got going early, played a near perfect 60 minutes. They caught fire early, and nor the Wahoos or the Scott Stadium sprinklers could slow down the Virginia Tech Hokies.
Yeah, I see what you did there, Braden. It's the most points scored by either team in the history of this rivalry, the 104th iteration, and the Hokies put up 55. Pretty cool. It was a special day at Scott Stadium. Virginia Tech on offense, they were absolutely cooking. 500 total yards of offense for the Hokies. Season high, 8 plays of 20 or more yards. It was the big plays for Virginia Tech that really made the difference. And you can't say enough about Kyron Drones, right? He's the quarterback of the future here in Blacksburg, just a redshirt sophomore, the transfer from Baylor. I mean, he accounts for over 300 total yards. He has 3 total touchdowns, 50 on the ground. Just an impressive day for KD1.
And you talk about the history with this win on Saturday. Virginia Tech will go bowling for the first time in the Brent Pry era. For the first time since 2021, Raza, Virginia Tech's got a bowl game on the schedule.
Yeah, we don't know what bowl game it's going to be just yet. We'll find out on Sunday. But, man, what an accomplishment it is to go bowling in the first place. Going 3-8 last year. You get to 6 wins this year. That's a huge improvement from year 1 to year 2. And the important thing is you can see the clear improvements on the field, too. Brent Pry talked about it in his postgame presser after UVA. The transfers have made such a difference. He said they've been such leaders. And it's not just Kyron Drones. Bashal Tootin got in the end zone, rushing in with that 94-yard kick return touchdown. How about Quan Felton with 2 touchdowns? He's got 4 in his last 3 games. Jalen Lane's been huge. APR on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, you can't say enough. So really the question is, where do you go from year 2 to year 3? Because it's portal season now. You already know this coaching staff is going to really attack the portal. The question is, how good can they be next year?
Well, spirits are definitely high with more on this dominating win in Charlottesville this past weekend. We send it on over to our very own Nels Williams with more on the Commonwealth Clash.
Einstein supposedly once said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result. And from the Virginia Cavaliers' perspective in regards to the Commonwealth Clash, they've certainly gone cuckoo, as Virginia Tech racked up the most points ever against UVA in a 55-17 rout last Saturday, notching the first win of the rivalry in the Brent Pry era and further cementing its dominance over the Hoos in recent memory, as the Hokies have now won the last 22 of 24 meetings between the two programs. In fact, the late November contest has been so lopsided by Tech for so long that the current UVA freshmen, or first years as they're called in Charlottesville, could have only witnessed 1 Cavalier win in their lifetime, and that was back in 2019. Virginia Tech put up a historic performance by pinning the Hoos on their heels on all 3 sides of the ball. Offensively, Kyron Drones and company dropped 500 total yards on UVA's defense and exploded to produce 8 plays of 30 or more yards, with 5 of those resulting in touchdowns. Drones himself tossed for 248 yards and 3 touchdowns, the second most yards he's thrown for all year. And on the ground, 117 of its 252 rushing yards came from running back Bashal Tootin, who scored twice, once on a 34-yard run, and the second coming off of a 94-yard kick return following a Virginia field goal to put the dagger into the Cavaliers. Defensively, the Hokies held UVA to 286 yards and limited Cavalier running backs to just 1.5 yards per carry. But Tech especially succeeded in putting quarterback Anthony Calandria on the map, not because of his claim defeating Tech came true before the clash, but with the X's marked on the field when the Hokie defenders took him down 6 times, and in the air, Calandria was picked off once. So while Tech enters December with high spirits and a bowl game on the horizon, Virginia faces the 22nd offseason since 1999 with the Commonwealth Cup trophy case empty. But don't worry, UVA, there's always next year.
Thank you, Nels. Great stuff as always. Virginia Tech did a whole lot of flipping the field on Saturday, and now we will flip our script here in the studio to talk some Virginia Tech hoops. There was some magic in Orlando this weekend, and no, I'm not talking about Disney or the Magic Kingdom. Virginia Tech Hokies and Mike Young's squad, they earned a spot in the ESPN Events Invitational Championship on Sunday after besting Boise State and Iowa State, but they fell to the Final Four participant a year ago in the FAU Owls. I mean, they are the number 19 in the country, Gio, but What did you see out of the Hokies all tournament long in the Sunshine State?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway here, both Raza and Braden, is the fact that Virginia Tech found a way to grow defensively throughout this trip to Orlando, and that was kind of the question mark heading on down there. They played arguably their worst half of defense of the entire season in half number 1 against Boise State. Then kind of were able to close things out. They showed the ability to win a tight one against a very solid Iowa State team. I mean, this is a team that is 25th in the net, 27th in the Ken Pom. The Cyclones are absolutely no slouch. So that was an impressive win for Virginia Tech. They had to play good defense in order to execute that on a night where the offense struggled a little bit. And then how could you not talk about Sean Padula? This is a cat that can be clutch for Virginia Tech down the stretch. The junior point guard dropped 17 points, shot 5 of 7 from beyond the arc against Iowa State in that win. So I think defense got better. Virginia Tech showed that they can play with some big dogs, and Sean Padula was a bright spot.
I mean, you look at the opponents they played, Boise State, Iowa State, FAU, all three of them potentially tournament teams come March, so definitely a tough schedule Virginia Tech played, and I think they could be battle-tested as they get into the ACC conference play. But Raza, another thing we got to touch on, Hunter Couture, the program's all-time leading scorer from behind the three-point arc, made his 270th career three-pointer, and he did it in front of friends and family, the Orlando native, making history in Orlando. How special of a player is Hunter Couture?
I mean, Hunter Couture is as special as they come in the Virginia Tech men's basketball program. He is the quintessential Hokie, and nobody will tell you that more than Mike Young himself. He said it so many times, how much Hunter means to this team, to this program, to this town. And for him to be able to do that back home, I think, was really cool. But this is a guy that just bleeds maroon and orange. I know he might not have had the start to the year he's wanted thus far. He hasn't even scored 20 in a game yet, but I mean, this is a guy that his jersey might be in the rafters one day over in Castle Coliseum. Really, he knows what it means to be a Hokie.
I bet he'd come coach here someday.
I would not be surprised about that at all. Mike Young has said that he could definitely be a coach after his playing time is done. He's got the acumen to do it, so I definitely would not be surprised about that either.
Yeah. Virginia Tech's got some great assistant coaches. Now I feel like you could add Hunter Couture to that list. Would definitely be something special. But I'm going to go back to you, Gio. Virginia Tech, they fell to FAU. They followed that up with a tough loss at Alabama against the Auburn Tigers in the inaugural ACC-SEC Challenge. Where have you kind of seen the struggle out of Virginia Tech in the last 2 games or so?
Yeah, I think it starts with poor shooting, right? Particularly from beyond the arc for Virginia Tech. Let me run some numbers here for you, fellas. 139th in the country in three-point percentage is Virginia Tech. They went 4 of 19 from downtown against Campbell. Now, that was a game against Campbell that you could kind of rely on your defense in that ball game. It was a low-scoring affair, but let's be honest, Virginia Tech should have won that one in a little bit more convincing fashion. You go 2 of 17 down in Orlando against FAU on that Sunday, and then 6 of 20 against Auburn from beyond the arc just the other night. So this is beginning to be a trend. We said against Campbell, hey, everyone's going to have an off-night shooting. Now you're seeing it game after game and against some good teams as well. So I think Virginia Tech has to improve there. And we thought they were going to be a lethal team from beyond the arc this season. And then it comes down to struggles on defense as well. 133rd in the country in scoring defense. Auburn scored 42 points in the paint against Virginia Tech. They just had their way on the inside. You got to take care of the basketball. 21 turnovers against Auburn. 12 of those came in the first half. They're averaging just 12 turnovers per game, which is 121st in the country. So Virginia Tech, you just got to, all 3 phases of the ball, you got to start to clean things up a little bit here.
Yeah, you got to protect the rock. It's the name of the game. And Raza, looking at that Auburn game in particularly, I mean, the Tigers are a good team. They went to the Final Four in 2019, but the Hokies just looked a little bit unmatched in that game against Auburn. Auburn started hot. They went out to a 15-3 run in the first 7 minutes of play, and Tech tried to climb out of that for the following 33 minutes, but they couldn't seem to get out of it. Yeah,
I mean, you said it, Braden. Auburn is a good team, and that's a good program, right? 2019, Bruce Pearl led them to a Final Four and almost a national championship appearance. You know, we won't get into that. That's ancient history. But Auburn's a good team. They're long. They're athletic. They can shoot the ball. They play great defense. They're 16th in the Ken Pom rankings. They're 11th in Ken Pom's adjusted defensive efficiency. And Gio touched on it. Tech, when you can't shoot the ball and you get out to an early hole, it's really hard to dig yourself out of it. They shot just 27.5% from the field. One of the lowest shooting performances in Mike Young's tenure here at Tech. That's just not a recipe for success. They also committed 25 fouls. They were in really, really deep foul trouble. The bench was emptying out. Jaden Young got extended run. John Camden got in the game for the Hokies. These are guys that, you know, Mike Young would like to get into the game maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and at that, maybe at the end of the game when you're blowing the team out, not when you really need to be putting in good minutes early in the second half or late in the first half. Tyler Nickel was picking up quick fouls. Robbie Barron, who's supposed to be one of your veteran presences on the team, he fouled out in just 11 minutes of play. That's just not a recipe for success. So the Tigers, they're a good team. John Ibroom, that's a great player. He dropped 30 points and 13 boards against the Hokies. But, man, they were just outmatched, like you said, Braden.
Yeah, he's a freak, and don't get me wrong, he's a fantastic player, but you need more from Lynn Kidd. This was a guy that going into the weekend in Orlando, he had scored in double figures in every single ball game. He was a double-double machine with 3 of them on the season. He's kind of started to fizzle out once he's played some better big man. He was really no contest for Broom, who had his way. 30 points, very impressive. 13 boards as well.
Broom might be the biggest big man, if you will, that Virginia Tech faces until maybe Kyle Filipowski, I would say. I mean, the guy was athletic, to say the least. He could score the points, get the rebounds, and do everything in between. So Lynn Kidd definitely had his hands full and couldn't really get the job done. But Virginia Tech, now they will shift to an ACC game, just a single game against Louisville this weekend on Sunday. I'm going to start with you, Gio, then go to Raza. But where do you see this Virginia Tech team standing right now as they enter their first ACC contest?
Well, they were picked to finish 8th in the ACC, and that's kind of right where I see them right now. Middle of the pack towards the bottom of the conference. Not great, but the beautiful thing is undefeated in conference play, right? You haven't played a conference opponent yet, and you kind of get to have your feet wet a little bit here. Now, Louisville's a little bit better than maybe we had thought coming into second season under a new head coach. They really struggled last year, did the Cards. But you kind of get your feet. You don't have to play a Duke or a Carolina or one of these top-tier teams in the ACC for your first ACC contest. That certainly helps things to get off on the right foot. And just look at Virginia Tech football, guys. That's a team that started 1-3 in the regular season before they ever played a single conference game. There was a certain point where they were 4-2 in ACC play, and they were playing meaningful football the first week of November. That is right where you want to be. I mean, they were in the conversation for a chance to go to an ACC championship. So it just goes to show that when there's more meaningful football games, right, there's a lot more pressure. You only get to play 12 games. You can still right the ship. When you get to play 30 basketball games, there is still plenty of time to right the ship if you're Virginia Tech. It is not time to hit the panic button by any means, but you got to start to figure some stuff out. Starts again with the defense and shooting from beyond the arc.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe Mike Young can take some notes from Brent Pry in the football program here. There's still plenty of time. And, yeah, they open against Louisville, but let's keep 2 things in mind. Louisville, even though they are improved from last year, still not a great team. They rank in the bottom 150 in the KenPom, so a lot behind a lot of other Power 5 programs. And after Louisville, you've got 3 more games against Valpo and American and Vermont. So it's not just that you're opening ACC play and then jumping right into ACC play. You've got 3 more, proverbial tune-ups at home. You don't go on the road until New Year's Eve against Wake Forest. You've got some time to regroup here at Castle. They're not going to leave Blacksburg for a month. I think this is a great opportunity for Tech to kind of get their bearings. Gio, you nailed it. They got to get the defense right. They got to limit the turnovers. And I think the key to that is figuring out this rotation. We thought maybe at this point in the year, Mike Young and company would have it down, but they're still trying to figure it out. Foul trouble certainly doesn't help with that. But we'll see how they kind of attack that problem, especially with MJ Collins dealing with injuries right now. They got a lot to figure out, but the good news is they got 4 games to do it.
Louisville, a team that only won 4 games a year ago. They're already up to 4 wins as they will come into Castle Coliseum and play the Hokies on Sunday. The Hokies hoop season has just begun, and to give us more of an inside look on the Virginia Tech men's basketball team, we send it to our very own Robert Bateman.
It's that time of year once again that we all know and love. The snow has fallen, there's a sense of joy in the air, and of course, that's because we're in the heat of college basketball season once again. For Mike Young and his men in the New River Valley, it's been a bit of a rocky start to the season. Currently sitting at 5-3, the Hokies gained momentum when they went to Orlando for the ESPN Events Invitational, starting the tournament 2-0 with victories over Boise State and Iowa State by a combined 16 points. But Virginia Tech found themselves in a David versus Goliath situation, facing number 19 FAU in the tournament final. Now, playing one of the best teams in the country is obviously a tough test, and with finals season ever looming on these students, VT could have used a little more tutoring as they lost by 34 points, 84-50. Well, when you've hit rock bottom, the only place to go is up, right? Well, that wasn't necessarily the case for the boys from Blacksburg, as they took on Auburn in the ACC versus SEC Challenge on Thursday night and lost once again, this time by 17. So let's weigh the positives and the negatives here. On the bright side, Lynn Kidd has been a breakout star down low in his junior season, averaging 15 points and 8 rebounds on efficient shooting. And speaking of shooting, how about Hunter Couture? He's also done pretty well in his first 8 games, averaging 15 as well, and shooting 37% from 3. Now, where have the issues come for Mike Young and his men? They've really struggled to retain possession, and hitting their shots has also been a problem. Virginia Tech currently averages more than 11 turnovers per game, and in their 3 losses this season, they've shot a measly average of 36.9% from the field.
Now, with the pressure on, the Hokies are ready to enter their first conference game against Louisville this Sunday inside Castle Coliseum, where they have a chance to write the course heading into the bulk of their schedule. Guys?
Thank you, Rob. Fantastic job as always. There's a lot to be excited for when it comes to Virginia Tech men's basketball and women's basketball in 2023-24. We talked about the men's team, but we can't forget about Kenny Brooks and the Virginia Tech women's squad. The Hokies took a trip down to the Cayman Islands last week, took down Tulane and Kansas in 2 tight games. And if the November Madness couldn't get enough, they took a trip to Baton Rouge to take on Kim Mulkey and the LSU Tigers on Thursday. They failed to leave Baton Rouge with a win, but they did have a great game against LSU. But Raza, this has to be one of the hardest schedules in all of women's college basketball. I mean, you look at the Final Four last year. Tech was one of the teams. South Carolina, they haven't played, but they played the other 2, Iowa and LSU. Is this Virginia Tech team battle-tested in your opinion?
Oh, battle-tested I think would be a very, very big understatement. Listen, it's one thing to play one team from the Final Four last year. It's another thing to play 2 teams from the Final Four last year. It's another thing to go on the road to play the defending national champs who added the top 2 transfers in the portal. And not to mention, they played Kansas down in the Cayman Islands. Kansas won the women's NIT last year. So this is a very, very tough schedule. So listen, it might not have gone the way Tech wanted to, losing to Iowa and losing to LSU, but they really hung in there with Iowa. That was a close game going down to the wire. What an awesome showing. We were down there
so much fun
in Charlotte. Georgia Amore, Caitlin Clark going at it. That was honestly some of the most fun I've ever had at any sporting event. And yeah, the LSU game didn't go the way that Tech might have wanted to, but you got plenty of lessons to take away. Still a young team with a lot of moving pieces, kind of like we talked about with the men's team. They're trying to figure out things like the rotation and the defensive issues, but I think that they'll be just fine moving down the stretch, Gio.
Yeah.
And Gio, just an absolute heartbreaker though at LSU. I mean, Virginia Tech, they got out of the gate firing. They were up 18-9 in the first quarter, in the early part of the second quarter. They trailed for the final 24 minutes of that game. Angel Reese and LSU, Reese making her return to the Tigers. They just came to play the full 40 minutes, if you will. Well, what did you see out of Tech on Thursday, though?
Yeah, I just felt like, guys, like Virginia Tech was a little out-talented in this one, right? LSU just felt a little bigger, faster, taller, stronger in this one. I mean, you're talking about the defending champs, and Raza, to your point, they had the top 2 transfers, right? And Anissa Morrow, she had 19 points in the ball game, and then, of course, Haley Van Lith running the point for LSU. You literally went out and poached the 2 best players in the transfer portal and added it to a national championship roster. I mean, what more can you say than that? It just felt like Tech hasn't quite gelled yet, and LSU has, right? At this point, even without Angel Reese for a couple of weeks, you know, Kim Mulkey has that team already kind of gelling and locking in, and that's what you get with talent. A little different than Matilda Ack and Olivia Summiel. Very, very great players in their own regard, but you look at some of the numbers, Haley Van Lith and Morrow were 2 of the nation's leading scorers. And then on the other side, you're adding, you know, more 6 women type talent and Ack and then Summiel for Virginia Tech. And that's kind of where you saw the difference is the new pieces. Hokies also shot the ball very similar to the struggles on the men's side. 4 of 21 from beyond the arc and got rebounded, 43-29. Just really difficult to win a basketball game when you trail in those 2 categories like that.
Yeah, you know, Gio, you talk about gelling. I think a common thread between the Iowa loss and the LSU loss for the women is that it was really hard to pick up the slack if it wasn't Georgia Amore or Liz Kitley doing it. You know, especially against Iowa when Georgia dropped over 30 points. Last night it was kind of nobody was picking up the slack. You know, when the Hokies got off to that fast start, Georgia was making her jump shots. She started the game with 2. Liz was doing her work down in the paint. But as soon as LSU saw that they could be aggressive on the offensive side of the ball, nobody was really able to stop them defensively. Anissa Morrow was just incredible. Even Michaela Williams was doing big things. It was Angel Reese's return, but it certainly wasn't the Angel Reese show. And I think the Hokies, just to your point, Joe, you're absolutely right. They need to figure out how to get this thing going at this point in the season.
It felt like early on in the first quarter, Georgia was starting to cook, right? And she's hitting her shots. You know, she's doing that thing where she's really like a water bug out there, creating her own shot, and a couple of them falling early. And you just thought, like, hey, all right, this is one of those games. Georgia kind of has that chip on her shoulder. She's going to take the game over like she did against Iowa. Yes, the Hokies lost, but we got that premier matchup we wanted to see, right? You got Caitlin Clark and Georgia Amore. Everyone was looking forward to it in the Final Four. Didn't get it. Hokies felt like they came out with that edge. Like they had lost to that team in the Final Four, and then for whatever reason, it just kind of shifted, especially going into halftime. I'm a big believer in the way you end a half really can dictate the game. LSU goes on that run to close out quarter number 2, and that was kind of all she wrote for the night.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough place to go play as a road team in Baton Rouge, and Virginia Tech, they started hot, but again, could not play a full 40-minute effort. And Virginia Tech, 7 games through the season, they're 4-0 against non-Power 5 teams, averaging 87 points per game in those contests. But you look at a more national level, against Power 5 teams, the Hokies are only 1-2 in games against Kansas, Iowa, and LSU. So I'm going to start with you, Raza, and then go to Gio. I mean, do you have any concern about that? Where do you see the Hokies standing on a national level right now?
I wouldn't say I'm concerned. It's like we talked about. This is a tough schedule. They are battle-tested, and they still have some stuff to figure out, whereas, Iowa and LSU, they still returned a lot of the talent they did from last year. Tech actually lost a lot if you look outside of Georgia Amor, Liz Kidley, and obviously Kayla King. But listen, this is still a top 15 team, all right? Not everybody is going to go 2-0 against the two of the Final Four teams from last year. I think a lot of teams in this country would go 0-2. Still a great team. You got a preseason All-American in Liz Kitley. You got 2 preseason first-team All-ACC players in Liz and obviously Georgia Amor. This is a very good team. They've proven they've been there before. Kenny Brooks is going to figure this thing out. And in my opinion, it's not a question of how good are they right now. The question is how good can they be? You got a couple of months. Listen, the ACC is stacked. There are some very good teams in this conference, but they're going to figure it out. The question is, when we get into February and March, I think we're going to see this team be a lot better. How good can they be is my question.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And kind of piggybacking off of that, right? This is not the same team that you're going to see at the end of the season, right? College basketball season is long. That's kind of the beauty of it. You watch a team grow throughout. For instance, when the men back a couple of years ago won the ACC tournament championship, I mean, that kind of came out of nowhere, right? Sometimes it takes getting hot at the right time. And I take you to Virginia Tech women's basketball last year. They went through a skid in late December at the beginning of ACC play, right? They lost to Notre Dame, lost a tough one on the road at Clemson that they probably shouldn't have lost, and then they lost on the road to Miami as well, and you just kind of started to think, are the Hokies as good as advertised, as good as people thought? And then, boom, they never lost again until the Final Four, and they won an ACC championship. So it does take time. With that being said, got to find a way to replace the production of girls like Deasia Gregg, Kiana Traylor, and Taylor Soule. Just such valuable pieces, such unique individuals, brought so much to the table. Got to find a way to get that out of some of the younger players. I think Wenzel's such a bright spot, and you need more out of Eck and Samuel as well.
I mean, as the old saying goes, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we're only 7 games in through this college basketball season, so a lot of basketball left for Virginia Tech. We haven't even started ACC play left, so a whole season left for women's basketball. To talk more about the early season narrative of Virginia Tech women's basketball, we pass it on over to Kyle Marshak with more on the Women's Hoop Squad.
What does Virginia Tech women's basketball's non-conference schedule have in common with my junior year in high school? Having 2 massive tests to worry about. For me, it was calculus and chemistry, but in the case of the Hokies, it was their 2 ranked opponents in the non-con slate so far, being number 3 Iowa back in early November and number 7 LSU just last night on November 30th. Unfortunately, Virginia Tech got an F on both exams, but this doesn't mean the Hokies aren't still passing this season so far. Losing 80-76 to Iowa and now an 82-64 loss to LSU, those are the only Hokies defeats. But all of their extra credit assignments and quizzes in between have been cakewalks for Virginia Tech, which is what you should expect from the reigning ACC champs, right? All right, ACC play doesn't make their schedule any easier, though, starting in a month, with 6 total teams standing in the top 25 as we speak in the conference. So let's dissect exactly what this team needs to study in order to pass the multifaceted exam that is ACC play, which begins, as I said, December 31st. So what's the commonality of struggles for this Hokie squad between their 2 losses so far? Well, I mean, anyone can look at those box scores and say, yeah, they shot subpar against ranked defenses, shooting 39% from the field against the Hawkeyes and a similar 40% against the Tigers last night. But if you look at the tape, I think it paints a little bit of a better picture, a caricature of experience and chemistry. See, that's the ultimate difference maker from last year's roster to this year's roster. You have the same trifecta of talent in Liz Kitley, Kayla King, and Georgia Amor, but you lose the poise of all-conference forwards in Kiana Traylor and Deasia Gregg. So how is that expressed in the Hokies' product on the floor this year? Well, like I said, I'd say the experience factor comes in when you have slightly less tenured wings in their replacement. Now, don't get me wrong, Big Ten transfers Rose Mishaw and Matilda Eck are excellent scorers, but their defensive efficiency does not match that of their own graduated counterparts. But furthermore, iso ball appears to be more prevalent too than ever, as the Hokies leaned on a lot of solo efforts from guards and Georgia Amor specifically in their lopsided defeat by the hands of the Tigers. Chemistry, not there yet, I guess. So the good news is this: if there's any professor this side of the Mississippi that can correct the lack of academia It's Kenny Brooks. And with the talent roof this squad possesses, I still think they have a chance of passing with flying colors. Guys.
Thank you, Kyle. Great work as always. We have time for one final segment on today's show, and I figure it's only fitting that we're graced with the presence of the two men that got it covered. We got to put your knowledge to the test. I mean, you've shown all season long that you can make picks against the spread. How about your ability to make picks, but the prop picks? So that's what we're going to do today. I have 5 over-under props for this week's football and basketball slates, and we're really going to test your knowledge and see if you know your stuff here. So we should get started without further ado. First prop I have for you, I'm going to start with you, Gio.
Yeah.
Lynn Kidd against Louisville on Sunday. Over under 14.5 points for the Hokie Center.
Well, first and foremost, I appreciate the compliment, but I don't know if we truly do have it covered because we currently hold a losing record on that show.
Hey, we got one more slate to fix that.
Conference championship week, though, we're right on the brink, so we're hoping to finish above 500, baby. We got a big one coming up Friday night.
Yes, sir.
You got Oregon, Washington. But
Yes, sir.
to answer your question, you go Lynn Kidd over under 14.5 points against Louisville on Sunday. I'm going to go over. You know, Tech's going to need him to get going, right? And Louisville allows 75 points per game. That's 250th in the country. Not too good if you're the Cards in all of college basketball. So I think over, Tech's going to need him on the inside.
First of all, let me say, Braden, what a tremendous line on your part. Lynn Kidd averages 14.6 points per game, so 14.5 is pretty darn close to 14.6. I'm going to agree with Gio. He's going to go over 14.5. I think he's been their most consistent scorer, especially when you get him the ball on the inside against a team like Louisville, who's susceptible to giving up points, ranking 184th in adjusted defense, according to Ken Palm. And Mike Young has told us before, he says, establishing the game down low is like establishing the run in football. You really need to do it if you want to have a chance to win. I think they're going to bounce back in a big way. Lynn Kidd's going to have a big game against Louisville. I'm
going to have to agree with you both on there, especially coming back to Castle Coliseum, getting the Castle Guard in there. I feel like Lynn Kidd is very much poised to have a good game. Now shifting our attention to women's basketball. They welcome in the Long Island University Sharks on Wednesday out of the Northeast Conference. Starting with you, Raza, do you think the Hokies will score over or under 85.5 points at the conclusion of that game against LIU?
I'm going to go over. You said it earlier in the show, 87 points per game against non-Power 5 opponents, and I think the Sharks are about to get bit in a big way. It's not just that they're not a non-Power 5 team. It's that, you know, they're probably ranking on the lower end of the Hokies' opponents this year. They feast on bad teams. They did it against Houston Christian. They did it against High Point. They're going from playing the defending national champs in LSU to playing the Sharks. I think it's going to be a big game.
Yeah, I think they're going to be hungry. I think they're going to be a little bit upset as well. And this is a resilient bunch, always have been, incredibly well coached, obviously, under Kenny Brooks. I think it's a situation, too, where I'm going to take the over. I think Tech drops 100 in this one, or at least gets really, really close to it. LIU, like you said, is on par with Houston Christian and High Point. I don't think I need to say much more. I'm going to take the over.
I have to agree with you both on there. I'm not sure if it's going to be necessarily the same level as Houston Christian, but the Hokies have looked really strong inside Castle Coliseum. 99 against High Point, 102, I believe, against Houston Christian.
Yeah.
I mean, they've just been so good inside the castle, so I think they're going to go over there. And I don't think the movie Jaws is going to be playing after that game for Kenny Brooks' squad, because I don't see the Sharks having much chance in that game, but I feel like Virginia Tech will run away with it. Now moving to prop number 3. Staying with Virginia Tech women's hoops, of course, a tough loss to LSU. They came in as the number 9 ranked team. The AP poll comes out early next week. Gio, do you think that their ranking is going to drop to over or under 12.5?
I'm going to go under here, meaning that they drop below 12.5. I think they're going to be right around 15, and I think that's fair, right? Didn't look great in the loss against LSU, and I think that's the biggest thing. Didn't really look that competitive after the first quarter. You saw that margin split, and then never really got that much closer. So I think they're going to be around the 15 range. Again, still a very good team, still a very long season. You have everything in front of you, but now you have 2 losses, 2 very good opponents, 2 former Final Four teams from a year ago. But I think 15 is the sweet spot here for Tech.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about not just the loss, but the way they lost. I mean, Tech lost close to Iowa. They only dropped 1 spot in the top 25 rather, from 8 to 9. I think this is a bit of a worse-looking loss.
Yeah.
I think 15, you said it, is the sweet spot. I think it's not a terrible drop. It gives you plenty of room to improve, and I think Kenny Brooks' squad needs it at this point. So I'm going to say around the 15 or 16 range on Monday when the AP poll drops.
See, I'm going to give him a little bit more credit. I'll put him about 13 or so. I still think it's over 12.5, but again, it's a tough loss to LSU. Came in as the 7th ranked team, so I do think they will drop a little bit. I don't see him going all the way to 15, though. I mean, that seems like a pretty drastic drop.
I think it depends to what everybody else does, right? Like if everybody that is supposed to win wins, then then Tech probably would drop a little bit more. If you have some upsets in there, then it's like, okay, what do you do with that? You got a bunch of 2-loss good teams. So I think it really depends what everybody else does.
Don't exactly control your own destiny, so to speak.
Yeah.
And
Nor does it matter all that much.
Yeah, I
right?
mean,
it's so early.
It's
That's
December.
what I was
it's
going to
December.
say. I mean, it's just whoever gets that one ranking, whoever gets the national championship at the end of March, so it's still very early. But now moving to our penultimate prop. Going to football, ACC championship tomorrow, Louisville, Florida State. Louisville running back, Jawar Jordan. Are you going to take the over-under on 99.5 rushing yards for the Louisville running back in tomorrow's ACC championship game? Raza, I'll start with you.
Well, you mentioned got it covered. We love Louisville. We love Jawar Jordan. We've talked about it all year. In that vein, give me the over. And it's not just because he's so good, but it's because I think Louisville, they're going to have to play into their strengths. They're a better running team than they are a passing team. Jawar Jordan, maybe the best running back in the ACC. Jack Plummer, not exactly in the upper echelon of ACC quarterbacks. But not only that, Florida State's much better defending the pass than they are defending the run. So I think it's a matchup that kind of plays into Louisville's hands. They're going to have to establish a run if they want to have a chance in this game. Hey, we said it on Got It Covered. It's going to be a close game. I think they are going to have to run the ball to be effective, and I think Jawar Jordan's going to have to be the key piece of that to get it going. But I would say watch out for their backup running back, Isaac Arendo. He obviously had a huge game against Virginia Tech when we were there in the Derby City. He's really emerged, and I think he can eat up into some of those yards, but Jawar's the best player on the field. I think he's going to get over 100.
I think this is a situation where I'm going to stir the pot a little bit here. We can't sit here and agree all day long,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So I'm actually going to go ahead and say the opposite of you. I'm going to say just under, and I think it's close. But you mentioned Isaac Garendo, and I think he's the reason why. He's really emerged. The second half of the season had a coming-out party against Virginia Tech, a hat trick of touchdowns in the Derby City for Mr. Garendo in a ball game where Jawar Jordan had limited carries because he was a little banged up. They weren't sure if he was going to play in that ball game. He did end up going, but especially when Garendo started to cook a little bit, they realized they didn't necessarily need to play Jawar. Jawar did start the second half. That was something interesting that we talked about throughout.
It was strange, yeah.
But Garendo did have himself a heck of a day and really emerged and has been very good ever since. And I think for that reason, they don't need to put so much pressure on Jawar, right? They can rely on Garendo just a little bit. I think they're going to be closer to splitting carries. I think you could see like 18 out of Jawar and like 15 out of Isaac type of situation. And I think also they're going to look to get Jamari Thrash going in the receiving department. This is not a strong passing offense. Thrash has been a little less involved the last 3 games in particular. I think it's ACC championship week. I think you kind of dig into the playbook. You have a little bit of extra prep time here. I think you look to get Jamari Thrash involved. If this was all-purpose yards, I'm taking the over for Jawar Jordan all day long because he can pass catch out of the backfield like the best of them. But since it's just solely rushing yards, I'm going to have to go just under, and I'm going to say Garendo's the reason why.
See, you convinced me with that right there, Gio. I'm going to agree with you on that because here's my rationale. I think Florida State's going to be up in that game, late in the game, which is going to force Louisville to pass it more receiving yards potentially for Jordan. But as for his rushing yards, I think they will dip, and I think he stays under 100 in that contest. And I got the Seminoles winning that contest.
We think it's Rodemaker, or we think he has a concussion? It's the third string, because
Well,
that's going to change everything.
I was just
too.
about to ask Braden. I mean, you think they're going to be up late in the game, but the question is, how would they get there?
Again, you never know. That's the beauty of college football. It's complete
Yes, sir.
madness. You have no clue. It could be a third string that goes out there, plays the best game of his career, and then all of a sudden Florida State wins the ACC championship, could go further on. You have no clue. It's going to be an exciting one, though, to say the least.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out an anecdote for you guys just because we're on the topic. Florida State, the first and only time they've ever made the college football playoff was 2014. And a team snuck into that playoff by winning on championship weekend with their third-string quarterback. That was Ohio State with Cardale Jones. They ended up winning the whole dang thing. So listen, Florida State not out of this by any stretch of the imagination.
No. Now, this takes us into our final prop very smoothly. Selection Sunday on Sunday, they will announce the 4-team playoff. Over/under 0.5 ACC teams in this college football playoff. Gio, I'll start with you.
I'm going to say that if Florida State beats Louisville, you can't leave them out. 13-0 at that point. There's no way that you could leave Florida State out. I don't care if it's a third-string quarterback. It would be unjust to do so, right? Because, Raza, you and I were talking about this the other day off the air, right? It's kind of turned into the 4 most deserving teams instead of the 4 best teams. Florida State is one of the 4 most deserving teams if you have a conference championship and you're 13-0. Are they one of the 4 best teams in the country? Maybe even with Jordan Travis, they're not. I would argue that. Without Jordan Travis, they probably definitely aren't. But they are one of the 4 most deserving. 13-0, you could not dispute that. And I think that Florida State will be in the playoff if they beat Louisville on Saturday. So I'm going to go and take the over. ACC gets a bid with Florida State.
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous, kind of separation of deserving and best, because a 13-0 Power 5 champ, and not just a Power 5 champ that's undefeated. This is Florida State. This is football heritage.
This isn't TCU.
No, this isn't TCU. This is real football heritage. I mean, we've seen a lot of teams like Alabama and Ohio State get the benefit of the doubt even without conference championships. So should Florida State be in with a win? Yes. Will they be in with a win? I am not too sold. It really depends on how things shake up. I don't think the Noles control their own destiny here, guys. I mean, if Texas beats Oklahoma State, they're sitting at 12-1. The key to this is Alabama. If Alabama beats Georgia, you're going to be in a situation where the committee might have to choose between a fourth playoff spot with Texas, Alabama, Georgia. You got, so many different factors at play here. What if Washington loses to Oregon and they're sitting at 12-1? I mean, there's nightmare scenarios at play here, but the way I see it playing out, I like Michigan, I like Oregon, I like Bama to upset Georgia, and I like Texas to win. So even though I like Florida State to beat Louisville, I think of those 5 teams, they're just going to have the weakest resume. So even though there's a 0 in the loss column, they're going to be playing in the Orange Bowl in December.
I think they would riot in Tallahassee, and how could you not? You're 13-0 with it. You'd have to ask, what more do we have to do? And that would be terrible for the conference. It would show how weak the ACC is in the eyes of the College Football Playoff Committee. If you have a 13-0 conference champ and you don't get into the playoff, I hope all of the drama happens. And it starts tonight with Oregon and Washington.
Honestly, the drama is what we live for. And there's no better way for the 4-team playoff to go out than this. I mean, this is just so much fun. We're going to be so tapped in, dialed in on every second of every game here down the stretch. Good news for Florida State, even if they get left out at 13-0, which, listen, I think it could happen. I think it's a long shot, though. It's just the way I see it playing out. Automatic bid next year if you win your conference, if you're a Power 5 champ with a 12-team playoff. So this will not be a conversation we'll be having next year, luckily for Florida State. And I think they'll be back in this position next year. So we'll see what happens on Saturday night. It should be a treat to watch.
I don't know how you guys can make the argument the ACC isn't a football conference. You look at the amount of bowl-eligible teams, and the ACC was up there. I mean, they have a lot of good teams. It would be preposterous if you have a 13-0 team, the winner of the ACC, that doesn't make the college football playoff. So I'm going to take the over on it. And I mean, you make an argument, Raza, but that is a bizarre situation you bring up.
I mean, would you rather have a conference with a lot of 6-win teams or a lot of 8, 9, 10-win teams? That's my thing, though.
And that was my point. Ton of 6-6 teams in the ACC, right? Last week, it just felt like this huge surge. Virginia Tech, Syracuse, like all these teams had one more to get to bowl eligibility, and then they all did it, right? So, yes, it's certainly an awesome feat, but you only had one team all season long after pretty much week 1 that you thought could compete for a college football playoff. Louisville at one point, we're like, do they have an outside chance? But Duke beat Clemson week 1, and we're like, it's Florida State, and that's it, out of the ACC, and that's kind of how it's transpired.
But let me play devil's advocate here. You talk about week 1. Florida State beat LSU, and yeah, LSU's got 3 losses, but that's a team that is like consensus, like top 10, 11, 12 team in the nation, and they might have the Heisman winner in Jaden Daniels. That was an excellent. There you go. It's an excellent win for Florida State that bolsters their resume. So yeah, the ACC was weak, but again, that's a signature win that just throws a wrench in all this. So we'll see how it all plays out this weekend, Braden.
Well, it's an action-packed college sports weekend for sure, and that's going to do it for us in the studio here on the 3304 Sports Kickoff and Tip-Off Show. For my renowned panelists, Giovanni Heater and Raza Umerani, our reporters, Nels Williams, Robert Bateman, and Kyle Marshek. I've been Braden Schenck saying so long from the Moss Arts Center. We'll be back next week with another edition of the 3304 Sports Crossover Show. But until then, have a great weekend, everybody.